December 20th, 1943, and the skies over Bremen, Germany are about to witness something that will change aerial warfare forever. Second Lieutenant Charles Chuck Yeager, just 19 years old, banks his P-51 Mustang hard left as tracer rounds slice through the air inches from his cockpit. His hands are trembling so violently he can barely keep his grip on the control stick. This is only his 8th combat mission, and right now, staring death in the face, he has no idea he's about to accidentally revolutionize how fighter pilots will fight for the next 80 years. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 locked onto his tail is flown by Unteroffizier Ludwig Franciscott, a stone-cold veteran with 11 confirmed kills who's been hunting Allied pilots for 2 solid years. Franciscott knows every trick, every maneuver, every desperate move a panicked pilot might try, and he's already lining up the killing shot. Everything Chuck learned in training is screaming at him right now. Standard doctrine is crystal clear. You maintain formation. You execute coordinated attacks. You never, ever break away from your wingman. The Army Air Forces spent millions of dollars developing these tactics, and fighter groups practice them until they can do them in their sleep because survival depends on discipline and following the manual to the letter. Chuck glances at his fuel gauge and watches it dropping. His ammunition counter shows just 60 rounds left. The nearest friendly aircraft is 3 miles away, and by every calculation running through his terrified mind, he should be dead in the next 30 seconds. What Franciscott doesn't know, what nobody knows yet, is that Chuck Yeager is about to do something so reckless, so completely counterintuitive, that senior officers will dismiss it as impossible when he reports it back at base. But to understand why this moment matters so much, we need to rewind and look at why American fighter pilots were dying at absolutely catastrophic rates in the winter of 1943. By December of that year, the United States Army Air Forces is facing a full-blown crisis that threatens the entire strategic bombing campaign over Europe, and the numbers are just devastating. During the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raids back in August, the 8th Air Force lost 60 bombers in a single day. That's 600 men either killed or captured in one mission. Then in October, another raid on Schweinfurt costs 62 more bombers. The loss rate on deep penetration missions is exceeding 20%, which means bomber crews have virtually no chance of surviving their required 25-mission tour. The math is simple and terrifying. The core problem is range. The P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings can escort bombers to the German border, but they just don't have the fuel capacity to penetrate deep into German territory. Once those escorts turn back, Luftwaffe fighters swarm the bomber formations like wolves circling wounded prey. The solution seems obvious enough. Develop long-range escort fighters. North American Aviation has delivered the P-51 Mustang, which has the range to reach Berlin and back. But there's a second problem, and this one's far more insidious. American fighter doctrine is fundamentally, catastrophically flawed. The tactics manual, written by senior officers who learned to fly back in the 1920s, emphasizes formation flying and coordinated attacks. Fighter pilots are taught to maintain strict positioning, execute textbook maneuvers, and never break formation discipline. Individual initiative isn't just discouraged, it's practically forbidden. The manual is treated like gospel. Meanwhile, German pilots are absolutely destroying American fighters using a completely different approach. Luftwaffe doctrine, refined through years of brutal combat over Spain, Poland, France, and Russia, emphasizes aggressive individual initiative. German aces like Adolf Galland and Gunther Rall have developed the Finger Four formation and energy fighting tactics that give them enormous advantages in every engagement. The kill ratio tells the whole story. In late 1943, experienced Luftwaffe pilots are averaging 3 to 4 kills for every aircraft they lose. Some aces like Egon Mayer and Walter Naueny have kill ratios exceeding 10 to 1. American fighter commanders know something is desperately wrong. After-action reports consistently show American pilots being outmaneuvered despite flying aircraft with comparable or even superior performance, but the solution keeps eluding them. More training in formation flying doesn't help. Stricter adherence to the manual doesn't work either. The consensus among senior officers is absolutely clear. American pilots need better aircraft, more flight hours, and stricter discipline. The tactics are sound, they insist. The problem must be in the execution. This assumption is about to be completely shattered by a teenager from Hamlin, West Virginia, who barely graduated from high school. Charles Elwood Yeager is not supposed to be here at all. He grows up in the Appalachian foothills during the Great Depression, and his family is dirt poor. His father works in the coal mines and natural gas fields just to keep food on the table. Young Chuck hunts squirrels and rabbits to help feed the family, and in the process he develops absolutely exceptional eyesight and hand-eye coordination. He can spot a squirrel hiding in a tree at 300 yards. He enlists in the Army Air Forces in September 1941 as an aircraft mechanic with no college education, no wealthy family connections, and no prior flying experience whatsoever. He's assigned to maintain P-39 Airacobras out at Tonopah, Nevada, and that would have been the end of his story except for what happens next. In July 1942, the Air Forces faces a desperate pilot shortage. The training pipeline simply cannot produce pilots fast enough to replace combat losses. So the service launches the aviation cadet program, allowing enlisted men to train as pilots without officer commissions. Chuck volunteers immediately. His superiors are deeply skeptical. His educational background is marginal at best. His mechanical aptitude is excellent, sure, but flying requires split-second decision-making and spatial reasoning that supposedly can't be taught, and most candidates from his demographic wash out. He proves every single one of them wrong. At flight school in California and Arizona, Chuck demonstrates natural flying ability that instructors find absolutely remarkable. His vision is measured at 20/10, literally twice as acute as normal human vision. He can spot enemy aircraft before anyone else in the formation even knows they're there. He graduates in March 1943 and receives his commission as a flight officer. By November 1943, Chuck arrives in England, assigned to the 363rd Fighter Squadron, 357th Fighter Group, with approximately 270 flight hours logged. Most of his squadron mates have college degrees. Many come from wealthy families. Some even have private pilot licenses from before the war. Chuck is just the kid from West Virginia who talks with an Appalachian drawl and lacks the social polish everyone else seems to have. He's assigned aircraft number 43 to 6763, AP 51B Mustang. He names Glamorous Glen after his girlfriend back home, Glenys Dickhouse. On December 20th, 1943, he flies his 8th combat mission, a bomber escort run to Bremen, and this is when everything changes forever. The moment of insight doesn't come from careful study or brilliant tactical analysis. It comes from pure, raw survival instinct when Ludwig Franciscut's Bf-109 latches onto his tail, and Chuck realizes with absolute clarity that he's about to die. Franciscut fires a burst, and cannon shells rip past Chuck's canopy close enough that he can see them. The German pilot is closing in for the kill, positioning for a deflection shot that will absolutely shred the Mustang's engine and send Chuck spiraling into the German countryside below. Every second of Chuck's training is screaming at him to maintain altitude, execute a standard evasive turn, and try desperately to reach friendly aircraft. Every instinct says stay high where the Mustang has performance advantages. Instead, he does something completely insane. He rolls inverted and pulls the stick back hard, diving nearly vertical toward the German countryside 7,000 feet below. The airspeed indicator spins wildly past 400 miles per hour, then past 450. The Mustang's wings begin to buffet violently as the aircraft approaches its structural limits. The dive angle is so impossibly steep that Chuck's vision begins to gray out from the negative G-forces trying to pull him out of his seat. This is suicide, plain and simple. Everyone knows German fighters can outdive American aircraft every single time. The Bf-109's fuel-injected engine gives it enormous advantages in negative G maneuvers, and diving away from a 109 is precisely what you're not supposed to do under any circumstances. But Chuck isn't thinking about doctrine right now. He's not thinking about what the manual says. He's reacting purely on instinct, like a West Virginia boy who's been hunting his entire life, using terrain, using speed, using every possible advantage available. What happens next surprises everyone, including Chuck himself. The Mustang's Packard-built Merlin engine with its two-stage supercharger performs completely differently than anyone expected at these extreme speeds. As Chuck screams toward the deck in this suicidal dive, the Mustang actually accelerates faster than the pursuing Bf-109. The airspeed hits 500 miles per hour. The controls are nearly locked solid from the massive aerodynamic pressure. Francis Scott follows, firing repeatedly, but incredibly his rounds start falling behind. The Mustang is actually pulling away. At 1,500 feet altitude, Chuck hauls back on the stick with both hands, using every ounce of strength he has. The G-forces slam him brutally into his seat. His vision tunnels down to almost nothing. The Mustang's wings flex upward visibly, stressed nearly to complete structural failure. The aircraft bottoms out at just 800 feet, still traveling at 480 miles per hour. Francis Scott tries desperately to follow, and the Bf-109 pulls out at 600 feet, but the violent maneuver has bled off all his energy and speed. His airspeed has dropped to just 320 miles per hour. Chuck levels out, looks back over his shoulder, and sees something that absolutely should not be possible according to everything he's been taught. The German fighter that was about to kill him 30 seconds ago is now behind him, slow and completely vulnerable. Francis Scott is desperately trying to regain speed and altitude, but it's too late. Chuck reverses, climbs slightly using his massive speed advantage, and positions himself perfectly behind the Bf-109. At 400 yards range, he fires a 3-second burst. 50 caliber rounds tear into the German fighter's wing root and fuselage. The Bf-109 rolls left, trailing thick black smoke, and spirals toward the ground below. Chuck Yeager has just executed the first recorded high-speed yo-yo maneuver in combat aviation history. Except he doesn't know that's what it's called. He doesn't even fully understand what he's just done. He just knows he survived when by all rights he should be dead. When he lands back at RAF Leiston and reports the engagement to his squadron commander, the reaction is immediate and hostile. That is absolutely impossible, his commander says flatly. The 109 outperforms us in every single dive scenario. You must have misidentified the aircraft type. The intelligence officer's report is deeply skeptical. The gun camera footage is inconclusive because the dive was so violent the camera couldn't track properly. Several senior pilots review Chuck's account and dismiss it outright as confused memory caused by combat stress. "You simply cannot outdive a Messerschmitt," insists Major Thomas Hayes, the group operations officer. "Their fuel injection system gives them decisive advantages in negative G maneuvers." This is established fact backed by years of testing. The doctrine is crystal clear. American fighters should maintain altitude advantage and use coordinated attacks. Diving away from enemy fighters is explicitly discouraged in every tactics manual. What Chuck describes violates fundamental principles that senior officers learned at the Air Corps Tactical School and have been teaching for years. But Chuck isn't alone in his experience. Over the next 3 weeks, other pilots begin reporting eerily similar experiences. Lieutenant William Wisner executes a near-vertical dive to escape 2 FW-190s and discovers exactly the same phenomenon. At extreme speeds, the Mustang's performance characteristics change dramatically in ways nobody predicted. Captain Don Blakeslee, commander of the 4th Fighter Group and one of the most experienced American fighter pilots in all of Europe, decides to investigate properly. On January 11, 1944, he takes a P-51B up to 25,000 feet over the English Channel and executes a careful series of high-speed dive tests. The results are absolutely startling. Below 20,000 feet in dives exceeding 450 miles per hour, the Mustang accelerates faster than any German fighter they've tested against. The 2-stage supercharger, originally designed purely for high-altitude performance, creates completely unexpected advantages at high speed and low altitude. Blakeslee writes an incredibly detailed report and submits it directly to 8th Fighter Command headquarters, and the response is immediate and absolutely hostile. At a commander's meeting on January 18, 1944, Blakeslee presents his findings to a room full of senior officers, and the room practically erupts. Senior officers who have been flying since the 1920s are being told that fundamental assumptions about fighter combat are completely wrong, that a barely educated teenager from West Virginia has discovered something they completely missed. "This is reckless cowboy flying," declares Colonel Hubert Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group. "We absolutely cannot abandon proven coordinated tactics for individual heroics. That's precisely what gets pilots killed. Your data is fundamentally flawed," argues another colonel. "German fighters have fuel injection and we have carburetors. Basic physics doesn't lie." The meeting threatens to end with Blakeslee's report being simply filed away and forgotten forever. The bureaucratic inertia is absolutely enormous. Changing doctrine means admitting the previous doctrine was wrong, and entire careers are built on defending the existing system. Then Major General William Kepner, commander of 8th Fighter Command, intervenes decisively. Kepner is a maverick who learned to fly way back in 1916. He flew combat missions in World War I. He's watched far too many young pilots die following tactics that simply don't work, and he's absolutely willing to challenge conventional wisdom if the evidence clearly supports it. "Gentlemen," Kepner says quietly but firmly, "I honestly don't care if this contradicts everything we learned at tactical school. I care about kill ratios, and I care about bringing our boys home alive." Captain Blakeslee's group has the highest success rate in this entire theater. If his pilots are surviving by breaking the rules, then maybe, just maybe, our rules are wrong. Kepner orders immediate comprehensive testing. Over the next 2 weeks, test pilots put P-51Bs through absolutely extreme dive profiles, and the data confirms everything Blakeslee reported. At speeds above 450 miles per hour, the Mustang's acceleration in a dive genuinely exceeds that of both the Bf-109 and the FW-190. On February 3, 1944, Kepner issues what can only be called a revolutionary directive. Fighter pilots are now authorized to use individual initiative and aggressive tactics, explicitly including high-speed diving attacks. Formation discipline is deliberately de-emphasized. Pilots are actively encouraged to exploit the Mustang's high-speed performance characteristics. The old guard is absolutely appalled, but Kepner has the authority and he uses every bit of it. The new tactics are tested immediately in combat. On February 20th, 1944, the 8th Air Force launches Operation Argument, better known as Big Week, a massive campaign to systematically destroy German aircraft production facilities. Over 1,000 bombers strike targets deep inside Germany, escorted by P-51 Mustangs flying with Kepner's revolutionary new doctrine. March 3, 1944, and the sky over Berlin is about to see these new tactics in action. Chuck Yeager, now with 12 confirmed kills, leads a flight of 4 Mustangs at 28,000 feet. Below them, 300 B-17 bombers are approaching the German capital. Luftwaffe fighters are rising to intercept Bf-109s and Fw-109Es from Jägerschwader 3 and 11, some of Germany's most absolutely elite units. Oberleutnant Heinz Bahr, a legendary ace with 170 confirmed kills, leads a formation of Bf-109G6S. He spots Chuck's flight and begins a climbing attack, planning to use his altitude advantage for a devastating diving pass on the bombers below. Chuck sees them first because his exceptional vision gives him about 30 seconds of warning time. Instead of maintaining formation and executing a coordinated defense like the old doctrine demanded, he does something that would have gotten him court-martialed just 3 months earlier. He rolls inverted and dives, but not away from the German fighters. He dives directly toward them, building absolutely enormous speed. His wingman, Lieutenant Clarence "Bud" Anderson, follows instantly without hesitation. The other 2 Mustangs maintain high cover position. Bahr sees the Americans diving and naturally assumes they're fleeing in panic. He adjusts his approach to focus on the bombers, which is exactly what Chuck wants him to think. At 600 miles per hour, a speed so extreme that the controls feel like they're literally welded solid, Chuck pulls up hard underneath Bahr's formation. The Bf-109s are traveling at just 380 miles per hour, completely focused on the bombers ahead. They never even see the Mustangs coming from directly below. Chuck fires a 2-second burst at the trailing 109, and the German fighter simply explodes in midair. Bahr breaks hard left in shock, but Anderson is already perfectly positioned there, firing. Bahr's wingman goes down trailing sheets of flame. The remaining 2 109s dive away desperately. Chuck and Anderson don't pursue them. Instead, they climb back to altitude, using their massive speed advantage to regain position above the bombers. The entire engagement lasts exactly 45 seconds. 2 German fighters completely destroyed, 0 American losses, and the bombers continue unmolested to their target. This exact pattern repeats across the sky throughout Big Week. American pilots using the new energy fighting tactics are achieving kill ratios that were genuinely impossible under the old rigid doctrine. The Luftwaffe, completely accustomed to predictable American formations, is suddenly facing aggressive individual attacks coming from completely unexpected angles at impossible speeds. The numbers tell the whole story with brutal clarity. In January 1944, before the new tactics spread, 8th Fighter Command's kill ratio against the Luftwaffe averages about 2.1 to 1. By April 1944, after widespread adoption of energy fighting tactics, that ratio climbs to 4.3 to 1. By June, it reaches an astounding 6.1 to 1. German pilots notice the change immediately, and they're terrified. Oberleutnant Johannes Steinhoff, a veteran ace, writes in his diary that the American fighters have completely changed, that they no longer fly in rigid formations, that they dive from impossible altitudes at absolutely terrifying speeds, and that the fuel-injected engines that gave German fighters such enormous advantages simply don't matter anymore, because the Americans are somehow faster now. General Major Adolf Galland, commander of all Germany's fighter forces, reports directly to Hermann Göring in April 1944 that the American Mustang pilots have adopted German energy fighting tactics and somehow improved upon them, that their aircraft's high-speed performance genuinely exceeds German capabilities, and that Germany is losing experienced pilots at a completely unsustainable rate. The bomber crews noticed the difference too. Survival rates improved dramatically almost overnight. Lieutenant James Howard, a B-17 pilot, writes home saying the fighter boys are completely different now, that they don't just escort the bombers anymore, they actively hunt, and that the Germans are genuinely scared of them. May 8, 1944, and Chuck encounters his most challenging opponent yet. Hauptmann George Peter Eder, an ace with 36 confirmed kills, flying a Bf-109 G-10, the absolute latest variant with significantly improved performance. The engagement happens at 24,000 feet over Brunswick. Eder has the altitude advantage and initiates a diving attack. Chuck reverses directly into him, forcing a head-on pass. Both pilots fire. Both miss. Eder fully expects Chuck to climb away, trying desperately to regain altitude like American pilots used to do. Instead, Chuck rolls and dives nearly vertical, building massive speed. Eder follows confidently, completely certain in his aircraft's diving performance. At 550 miles per hour, Chuck pulls out hard and reverses. Eder tries to follow, but the G-forces are far too severe. His vision grays completely. His pullout is much too shallow. When he finally recovers, Chuck is sitting perfectly behind him at 400 yards range. Chuck fires a sustained burst. Eder's 109 takes devastating hits in the engine and wing root. Thick smoke pours from the cowling. Eder manages to nurse his badly damaged fighter back to his home airfield, but the aircraft is completely written off as a total loss. After the war, Eder writes that the American pilot who damaged his aircraft on May 8, 1944 executed maneuvers he genuinely thought were physically impossible, that the pilot dove away and somehow ended up behind him, and that their intelligence briefings explicitly said this could not happen, but they were completely wrong. By June 1944, the Luftwaffe is in absolute crisis. Experienced pilots are being killed much faster than they can possibly be replaced. Training programs are desperately shortened, producing poorly prepared pilots who die on their very first missions. The 8th Air Force achieves complete air superiority over Germany. The human cost is measurable and profound. Bomber loss rates drop from 20% in October 1943 to less than 4% by June 1944. Thousands upon thousands of aircrew members survive missions they absolutely would have died on under the old tactics. After the war, a B-17 pilot named Robert Morgan tracks Chuck down at an air show. Morgan flew 30 missions over Germany in 1944, and he tells Chuck directly that his crew calculated they should have been shot down on their 8th mission based on 1943 loss rates. But they flew 22 more missions after that, and that because of Chuck and pilots like him. They all came home alive, and that his children literally exist because Chuck figured out how to keep them alive. The impact extends far beyond World War II. The energy fighting tactics accidentally discovered by Chuck Yeager and systematically developed by commanders like Blakeslee become the absolute foundation of modern fighter doctrine that's still taught today. Chuck ends World War II with 11.5 confirmed kills. He shot down once over occupied France, evades capture with help from the French resistance, and returns to combat operations. He flies 64 missions total. After the war, he becomes a test pilot, and on October 14, 1947, he breaks the sound barrier in the Bell X-1, becoming the very first human being to fly faster than sound. The techniques he learned in desperate combat, energy management, high-speed control, and aggressive maneuvering prove absolutely essential for supersonic flight. He retires as a brigadier general in 1975 after an extraordinary career. He never claims to have invented energy fighting tactics. In his autobiography, he writes simply that he was just trying not to die, and if that happened to help other pilots survive, then he's grateful. But he didn't figure anything out. He just reacted on pure instinct. The tactics he accidentally pioneered are still taught today too. Every single fighter pilot, every pilot in the United States Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps learns energy fighting principles in their very first weeks of training. The concepts of trading altitude for speed, using high-velocity maneuvers to gain positional advantage, and exploiting aircraft performance at extreme speeds. These are absolutely fundamental to modern air combat. The P-51 Mustang, optimized for the tactics Chuck helped develop, becomes the most successful American fighter of World War II. North American Aviation produces 15,686 Mustangs total. They destroy 4,950 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat, more than any other Allied fighter type. The 357th Fighter Group, Chuck's unit, achieves the highest kill ratio of any American fighter group in Europe at 5.7 to 1. They destroy 609 enemy aircraft while losing just 106 of their own, and their success results directly from their early adoption of energy fighting tactics. Don Blakeslee, who fought bureaucratic battles to validate Chuck's accidental discovery, retires as a colonel with 15.5 confirmed kills. He never receives the Medal of Honor despite being recommended 3 separate times. He tells an interviewer in 1989 that the real heroes were kids like Chuck who figured things out when absolutely everyone told them they were wrong, and that he just happened to have enough rank to make sure people actually listened. William Kepner, the general who overruled his entire staff and authorized the new tactics, retires as a lieutenant general. His February 1944 directive is still studied at military academies today as a perfect example of leadership, the willingness to challenge established doctrine when hard evidence absolutely demands it. The German pilots who survived the war speak with genuine respect about their American opponents. Johannes Steinhoff, who became a general in the post-war West German Luftwaffe, writes in 1977 that by mid-1944, American fighter pilots had completely surpassed German pilots in both tactics and aggressiveness, that they learned faster than the Germans could possibly adapt, and that the Mustang pilots especially were absolutely exceptional. The lesson extends far beyond aviation. Innovation genuinely often comes from completely unexpected sources. The teenager from West Virginia with minimal formal education saw something that experienced officers with decades of flying experience completely missed. The system nearly rejected his discovery entirely because it contradicted firmly established doctrine and because it came from someone without the right credentials. How many other innovations have been lost throughout history because they came from the wrong person or challenged the wrong assumptions? How many lives could have been saved if organizations were better at recognizing truth regardless of where it comes from? Chuck Yeager dies on December 7, 2020 at the age of 97. His obituary in the New York Times calls him the most famous test pilot of his generation. It mentions breaking the sound barrier. It mentions his impressive combat record. What it doesn't mention is that he accidentally revolutionized air combat by doing something absolutely everyone said was completely impossible. Sometimes the greatest innovations come not from careful planning or extensive research, but from desperate improvisation in the moment. Not from experts dutifully following established procedures, but from outsiders who simply don't know what's supposed to be impossible. Chuck Yeager didn't set out to change military doctrine or revolutionize aerial warfare. He just wanted to survive his 8th combat mission. That he did so by breaking absolutely every rule in the book, and in the process save thousands upon thousands of lives, is exactly what makes his story so remarkably inspiring. The next time someone confidently tells you something is completely impossible because it contradicts established wisdom or accepted doctrine, remember the 19-year-old kid from West Virginia who was too inexperienced and too desperate to know he couldn't outdive a Messerschmitt. Sometimes not knowing the rules is precisely what allows you to break through them and change everything forever.